Okay, what's up, guys? I want to make this little tech tip video while I'm working on this engine. Engines that sit for a long periods of time need special procedures to prime the oil before starting, because bad things happen. One of the things that can happen is if your engine's been sitting for a long time, the oil will kind of drain off of the bearings, the rod bearings and the crank bearings, more or less the rod bearings, and it'll be dry. And then when you try to start it the first time and it fires up, or you crank it too fast, the bearing can actually wipe off and get destroyed, and it's very heartbreaking. It's happened to me, and that's why I'm making this video for you guys. So the method that I use, I'm gonna tell you about. There's other methods out there, like I've heard people going in and taking the oil pressure switch, and putting up some contraption and pressurizing the system, forcing oil in there to help prime it without having to spin the motor. But that's kind of a pain. If you don't have that ability, this is the way you do it. What you do is you fill up the oil, and what you want to do is put the oil to one of the marks, like the high oil mark is probably the best. And on an engine, flat engine especially, you kind of want to fill it up. I like to run like 0 weight or 5W or 0W oil on the first time, just so it can crank through there more quickly because it's thinner, to protect the bearings. But yeah, you put it at this level right here, and then you go ahead and you take out the spark plugs. It's very vital to take spark plugs out, and then you crank it by hand as fast as you can. I'm using a long cheater bar on here, and I just crank it by hand, and just spin it as fast as you can, and do whatever you got to do. Like I had to use an extension, and just so it wouldn't hit that, and just spin it, and you spin it for a little while until you see, you take the oil filter off, and you wait until the oil comes out of the oil filter area. Then you want to fill the filter up with oil, screw it back on, and then continue to spin it by hand. But what you'll notice is the oil level, when you check the dipstick, is going to drop. It's going to drop down every time you spin it. So every so often, like 20 cranks, or a few like 20 seconds of a crank or something that you're spinning it, go ahead and pull the dipstick out and check it and see if it's getting lower. If it's not getting lower, it's not pumping and it's not priming. But it should. Once you see oil coming out of there, it should prime up. I did notice that I had to add an additional quart and a half to the engine before it was back at the full level, once I was done priming the engine. If you have a very sensitive turbo and you don't want to damage the turbo on startup, what you can do is pull off the turbo drain, which is down here, the drain hose, or the feed hose, preferably the drain, I guess, but either way is fine, and crank it and see if any oil comes out. And once it comes out, you're primed and ready to go. Another thing that can happen on engines that have been sitting a long time on a stand is if it's sitting sideways or upside down, or in this case a boxer engine, I could position it sideways to hide it so it doesn't, or I can tuck it away for saving room in the shop. But if you do that and the oil's filled up, or even a half a quart, what happens is it can land on the back of the piston. Okay, I'm just warping over here so you can see what I'm saying. So the oil can puddle up on the back of this piston, fills up, and it will slowly get past the rings over time, and then it'll fill up the cylinder. And so the piston's working like this, if it fills up the cavity with oil, you can hydrolock it, and that's going to damage or bend a valve or break a piston. Bend a rod or piston. when you go ahead and crank it. So while I'm here, I might as well show you some other things. So this is a bearing, and I don't know if you can hear it, but it's dried up. This is a bearing that is attached to the timing system, and since if an engine's been sitting for a while, the grease can dry up and go bad. Another thing is the belts. Even though the timing belt, your engine, the JDM guy will say, hey, it's only got 30,000 or 50,000 miles. Well, if the engine's over 10 years old, or even close to 10 years old, I would definitely change the belt anyways, because the belt will eventually crack. It's rubber, so it's gonna crack, end up being like a tire. You can be looking fine, and then all of a sudden it just blows out because it's old. Also, you see all these choppy marks on here on the timing belt? Well, that's because the tensioner failed. And I've seen tensioners fail with no sign of grease, and they were flopping around, and they looked okay, but then when I fired the car up, they're flopping. So it can jump teeth and destroy the engine, bend the valves. Also, the reason why this has little marks on it is because the tensioner would fail, and this little guard was keeping the engine from jumping time, and it was rubbing basically the timing belt. And it was very lucky that this person didn't have the complete failure. Another thing, water pumps. Yes, even though the water pumps got low miles, they do have little rubber seals on the inside. I don't know if you can see it, but they have seals, and they age, and they don't age well. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but if it's something that it's easy to do now, might as well do it. Same with thermostats. They actually have rubber on the thermostats on a lot of JDM engines, so those can fail and can keep the engine, won't allow it to warm up, and it can run rich. It's also smart to go ahead and change the seals back here, the crank and the rear main, and especially the rear main seal. And any seals, cam seals that are hard to get to when it's in the car, go ahead and change it. I've seen Honda motors where the seal literally falls off into the timing cover and guzzles out oil and destroys the engine in a short amount of time. And other things you want to check are any hoses. If they're rock hard, definitely change them. When if they're easy to get to, it's okay, but if they're hard to get to, might as well change them while the car's or the engine's out. Like this, there's like things like this turbo inlet which kind of gets squishy and they tear. It's easy to do now, might as well do it, you know. And also spark plugs. I've had JDM engines with low miles, spark plugs were perfect, but I drove the engine for a little while and had a little misfire, and the misfire ended up destroying the coil too. But what ended up happening when I pulled the plug out was the electrode, little tip, fell off because it was in the car for so long. It had some erosion. So, you know, things don't last forever, especially if they're not being used. So keep that in mind. Finally, if you're changing the clutch, make sure you grease up any moving points, pivot points. On this model, there's no ball and fork. This has a pin style fork, but if it has a ball style fork, grease up the ball, grease up any moving points here with the high temperature proper grease. Any sliding points, because this can wear out your clutch. You don't want to have to pull the whole thing out again because you skipped out on greasing it properly. Don't use too much, just don't go in dry. That's what she said. And the last thing I like to do, once I start the motor, I let it run for a little while and check for any leaks or issues. And if I don't see any issues, I let it run for about 20 minutes or so. And guess what? I'm going to shut it down, drain the oil, change the filter, put new fresh synthetic oil back in, and then I can carry on after that. I'd also like to use a magnetic drain plug or whatnot. and I prefer to use either OEM or K&N filter because they're good quality. I trust them. But anyway, thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Please hit the like button and spread this video around for anyone that's thinking about doing a JDM engine swap. Yes, the engine is cheap, but you know, they can be $400, $300, $1,000, whatever. It's a lot cheaper than having a rebuild, but you do need to consider the price of all the components that you're going to have to go through when you throw it in the car, assuming everything is okay. I have a excellent source for JDM engines if you're wanting to go out of San Diego or have them ship it. Check out JDM Westside _ Inc. INC on Instagram. JDM Westside Inc. Give them a shout out. If you have any questions about their motors, talk to Joseph and tell him that Subtle Driver sent you, and he will give you a better price. Thanks for watching, guys. Give me some love in the comments below. Tell me if you learned anything, or tell me how horribly wrong I am, or if you have questions. Peace out. Oh yeah, and check out my Instagram @SuttleDriver. Thank you.